Hello everyone, and welcome to the Dice Commando YouTube channel. I'm Andrew, with you here as always. This is Go Again, a fabulous video cast covering the trading card game Flesh and Blood. This video and others like this one are possible thanks to viewers like you. Please show your support with a like and subscribe, and be sure to hit the bell notification icon so you don't miss any new videos. If you want to get involved with the channel, consider becoming a channel member. There are many benefits to channel membership, including access to our Discord, exclusive deck tech and strategy videos, and the opportunity to help create channel content. I want to sincerely thank all our channel members, as I truly couldn't do this without your support. You guys rock. Go Commando. Hello everyone, welcome back to Dice Commando and Go Again, a fabulous cast. Tonight we have a threesome for you. We have Josh the Intern, Andrew, myself, and we have special guest Matt DiGregorio. He's going to be filling us in on his experience at the Dallas Calling, doing the limited pool there, as well as some observations about the ProQuest. Hey Fab folks, so welcome back. Thanks for hanging out with us this evening. So Josh the Intern is back. How you been, man? How's it going?
I'm doing pretty well. How are you?
Yeah, we're doing well. Excited to be here tonight to talk about this, but also I've got a big weekend of Fab coming for myself. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We are here to talk about last weekend's big event and maybe some forecasts for this weekend's big event. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, I was not able to make it to the Dallas Calling. I had to go to a wedding for a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years, but my dad made sure that was priority over Fab, unfortunately. But I did get to cheer from the sidelines, kind of vicariously seeing through our local Discord that Matt was doing quite well for himself. And I'm looking forward to hearing about his adventures making the cut going into day two.
All right, so Matt, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Why don't you let the people bring everybody up to speed? How long you've been playing Fab? What's kind of your background? We know from what Joshua just said that you're a Houston guy, but yeah, just kind of tell us about yourself and Fab and anything else fun.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I've been playing Fab for about a year and a half now. Time really does fly, and I play over in Houston. I'm one of the local judges there. We've got a great community. Josh here is part of it. And this weekend, a bunch of us got in cars and road tripped up to Dallas, since it's right there, and competed in both the main event and the ProQuest. And I found myself unexpectedly making the cut to top 64. And then I made the cut again to top 32 for day two. So I guess I'll talk a bit about what really I see Tales of Aria Sealed being like, and what I personally did choices wise to get all the way up to 64. So
that's good. That's definitely what we want to hear about. But just to bring everybody else up to speed who maybe wasn't there, could you just walk them through the format? Because doing a competitive sealed at this, or a competitive limited at this level, maybe people aren't familiar with that. So could you just talk them through kind of the format, and then tell us. Then just go with it, man.
Yeah. So for anyone unfamiliar with the way the Dallas Calling worked and how the Cincinnati Calling will work. Is that first they do a sealed pool of just Swiss for about 7 rounds. It was 7 rounds in Dallas, and I would expect it to be the same for Cincy. And then at the end of that, they take a cut to top 64, and they do 8-man draft pods, and you play within your pod, and for 3 rounds of Swiss. And after that, they do another cut to top 32, and they luckily give you a little break there to go sleep, because that's a lot of Fab, 10 rounds of Fab straight in a day. So then the next day, you do top 32, again in 8-man draft pods, where you only play within your pod. and from there they take the top 8 to do one final draft pod.
How do they handle, or I guess actually maybe so they just take the top 2 from each pod then? Is that how it works, or?
Not quite. Your record carries over cut to cut. So,
Oh,
for instance, those of us who had more losses going in to top 64 and top 32 had to fight a little bit harder to get through. Um, I was able to win all 3 of my matches in the top 64, coming out bubbling in at 5-2 from Swiss. But people who had losses in the top 64 who didn't have as many losses as I did in Swiss, they got into day 32 even still placed higher than me.
I see. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then last question I have before I let you run. How did they do that with the with the sealed pool? Did you have to open someone else's cards and log it, or how did that work? I mean, the logistics of that for that large of a tournament has got to be mind-boggling, right? So,
Yeah, so I'll go over it for both the sealed and the draft. For sealed, since it was a little bit different. For sealed, you sat down at your assigned spot, you opened your own packs, and had a registration sheet, and then once you were done opening, uh, they had a thing where, okay, now everyone swap, and you handed both the registration sheet and your pile of cards to the person across from you, and then back to you, and you would log their card pool. And at that point, once they hand it back to you, you also then at that point have to declare your hero. So unlike a normal Fab Sealed event where between rounds you are completely free to change your sideboard, in this sealed event you have to commit. And I know for several people for Houston, we were talking about it, and some of them went, I think I realized I'd made maybe a suboptimal choice 2 or 3 rounds in, but had to stick with it because they were locked.
So is your hero locked and your deck locked, or can you still sideboard cards from your pool
You can still
with maintaining the
sideboard.
same hero?
Yeah. So you can still sideboard. So some people for instance, you see an Oldhim across from you, you can still go, okay, I kind of want to pull in a few more cards, make myself less weak to exhaustion. You see a Briar, you can go, okay, well maybe I want like a rejuvenation so I don't get locked down at low life and get arcaned. You can still make those kinds of decisions. That start a game process is still the same. But you can't go, oh, I'm done with this Briar token. Can someone please get me an Oldhim token? Or a Lexi or something.
Interesting.
Yeah. I thought that kind of really changed the dynamic of sealed, I feel. I think it made people less likely to take risks.
yeah, that makes sense. So yeah, what did you pick? Yeah, because what did you pick for the tournament then? I mean, or at least for the sealed portion.
Yeah, so I want to talk a little bit about my sealed pool to go into what I picked and why. Is I had what looked like a very good Lexi pool. A lot of red and yellow arrows, a really good ice suite, um, and a great lightning suite. But one of the advantages of having the registration sheet is it was very easy to see objectively how much of everything you had, because it marked the card and the pitch value and the totals for every section. And it was, well, I could make a pretty good Lexi deck, but I could also make this Briar deck that, while it might not have the same high power level, it would be a lot more consistent. So I ended up, I'd actually only pulled 6 Earth cards in my sealed pool. I went down to 4, and then took all my Lightning cards and made an almost mono Lightning Briar deck, and that's what I took through sealed.
Okay, interesting. So, and was the consistency call based just on the fact that she has a weapon that does damage, or yeah,
It
what was
was it
the?
was based on that. It was also based on knowing that I only really had one type of thing I was trying to fuse with. I had I had more of the lightning fuse cards for Briar. Like Rites of Lightning is a very good card for her since it doesn't need to do its own arcane. You can combo it with Bramble Spark, or you can use the lightning fuse. And since lightning made up the majority of my deck, having a couple of those was really helpful and part of what pushed that consistency decision. I could either Bramble Spark it or lightning fuse to get that key go again.
I see.
Was there any equipment that you pulled that led into that decision?
I did pull the Sutcliffe Suede Hides, so that did make it a little bit easier. But my equipment was actually the Suede Hides, the Ragamuffins hat, and the Runaways, which is another shoe. So it's not like if I'd gone Lexi, I would have been without a shoe. In fact, or without a shoe that could, it's really your main source of blocking arcane damage. So I still would have had something there. But the Suede Hides definitely made it an easy choice to go, okay, a consistent Briar versus a kind of high cap Lexi.
I see. So, kind of walk us through then your event. I mean, who did you see mostly, or were there any memorable games, or did you just kind of poke and poke and poke?
Yeah, so there were there were a few memorable ones. Obviously, the losses are memorable as well. But the third round, myself and Rob Seigel actually ended up across from each other. And we were both incredibly tired by this point because you've just had the sealed, you've had two other rounds that are obviously pretty tough. So both of us at that point were making all sorts of misplays. Um, he puts down a Stir the Wildwood unfused blue, and I hear 5, but it's obviously 3. I put down 2 cards to block it, which this is his power turn. I ended up taking like 5 more damage than I need to, and not having a card because of that. And then later on, he had a line that could have been lethal to me, but just didn't see it. Played his cards differently, and that led to me being able to use Inspire Lightning to finish him off the next turn to no response. Which Inspire Lightning is a very good card for Briar. I didn't think that going into this, but it was the finisher for about half my games. Was an Inspire Lightning yellow or red. That's a card for those of you who don't know. It's a 1-cost action. It doesn't do anything unless you Lightning fuse, but it's 1/2/3 arcane damage. It's almost like a wizard spell, but over an elemental Runeblade. The fourth round, I lost. Oh yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to ask, and I think you were about to go there, but I know you went 5-2, and I know at least 1 or 2 of the other Houston guys were also 5-2, didn't make the cut. So I'm just kind of curious, at what rounds did you get your losses? Just to try to understand kind of, what your expectations might be, where you feel like you're going to be close to the bubble. Obviously, we know earlier is worse, but where did your losses come?
So my losses were in round 4 and round 7. And the big key part of that is the round 7 loss. The later on your last losses, the better it is for you in Fab. The example I like to use is that if you do the math on Fab's website for how your tiebreakers are calculated, the difference between losing the first round and the last round and losing the second round and the penultimate round, it's an order of magnitude better for the person who lost first and last than the person who lost second and penultimate.
Interesting.
Yeah. It's a very interesting way the tiebreakers all work out, but basically going 3 rounds with no losses and then going into the higher rounds without that second loss. Going into round 7, I kind of knew at that point, win or lose that game, I was going to move on regardless, just because I was sitting there X1 going into the last round. So if I lose here, that gives me the best possible way to bubble in.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense.
Sorry, and like I said, sorry to interrupt your train of thought. I think you were
no
just
problem.
about to talk about that round 4.
Yeah, I wished I had my notebook right here. would have been a good foresight. But basically, round 4, I end up getting like blown out by my opponent. But it wasn't like real mistakes. It was just I feel like I didn't put like I went for consistency, but I feel like I didn't block well enough or something. That would, I I went into the calling. Before this, I'd always dogged on Ragamuffin's hat as like the worst equipment I've ever seen. And then I ended up using it in about half my games, and a lot of the key points for me were I could have had lethal in I think 2 of my games if I'd kept the card on top and put it on instead of putting it on bottom. For those of you who don't know, Ragamuffin's hat, basically, you have 1 card in your hand, so you pop it. You're allowed to pop it. You draw a card, and then you can put either card on top or bottom. It works functionally the same, actually, as a Stroke of Foresight from Warrior. And I would put the card on bottom, but if it had been on top, I would have actually had like an Inspire Lightning Fuse the next turn. So it's really interesting how little decisions like that can really impact your game. So that was just one of the lessons. I gained a newfound respect for that card just from how many times, because in other games, for round 6, I was able to keep a fuse and keep better defense by using Ragamuffins and putting a card and keeping a card on top. I guess the lesson is just keep the card on top. But I'd actually kept the original card for my hand put on top and took the new card as pitch. And that was how I won that game, was being able to do that. That gave me momentum turns for turns. So okay, now I only need this 1 3-block card to block.
I've had a very similar experience where I tend to lean towards Oldhim in a lot of situations where you've been very defensive and you blocked, and I have an element card or a fuse card in my hand. Ragamuffins, you happen to draw your elemental card, so you put the fuse card back on top, and then arsenal your element card, and next turn you have what you're going to need to fuse your dominated glacial footsteps, for example.
Yeah, the glacial footsteps, the Inspire Lightning, both of those very good combos to use with Ragamuffins. So yeah, it's
So
yeah, the other
I'm curious,
card.
and sealed out of your
Go ahead.
7 rounds, what heroes did you face?
It was primarily Briar. I think I'd have to go back and check my notes, but I think it was 1 Lexi. It was 1 Lexi, 1 Oldhim, and 5 Briars. Because I remember facing
what I
everything.
expected.
Yeah. Which for sealed, that's about how I expect things to go. I think sealed is very much weighted towards Briar, unless your sealed pool is just not that great for her. At which point you should probably have a pretty good Oldhim pool. And I think that while you can get really good Lexi pools with high power, I don't think they're going to be consistent enough out of a sealed pool. To where you would probably be better doing Oldhim or Briar. Draft is completely different though. I think draft it is much more balanced. And I can get into that in a little bit.
Yeah, well, I mean the timing's good. So yeah, so you went 5-2 with Briar in sealed, and then we go to the top 64. So you sat within your 8-man pod. And do you remember the hero breakdown from that, or at least, I mean, talk us through that?
So our pod was pretty balanced. I want to say we had pretty much the 3-3-2 split. Maybe it was 4 Briar, 3 Oldhim, 1 Lexi. But the pod was pretty evenly split in that respect. I went into that draft going, okay, this mono lightning Briar thing is working out for me. I should just do that again. and that's kind of what I drafted towards that in mind. And I got very good lightning pickups early on, so it became very easy for me to go, okay, I'll grab these and then just look for some good Briar cards in the second wave, and then come back and get more lightning, maybe some earth. So I prioritized lightning in that round, and then Briar cards. And
That brings up a question I want to ask because like I said, I've only done the one draft at in Vegas so far. Are you seeing that people are prioritizing the element cards first and then class cards second? Is that how you're usually seeing the packs kind of get dispersed throughout the
absolutely,
round, or
especially when you talk to a lot of the other high level players, everyone's strategy seems to be focus on the elemental cards. I believe on Fab's website they just put out a pack one pick one video about that as well, where again it was where they were talking about like Earthlore Surge, which for a lot of us locally we refer to that as pretty much our pack one pick one. Unless you see like Cracker Jacks, that's probably your pack one pick one is Earthlore Surge, followed by any of the three defense, the Elemental Claws, Autumn's Touch, Heaven's Claw, or Winter's Grasp. Those are all pretty high pickups when you open a pack.
I mean it makes sense. You can't fuse without your. I mean, right? So I mean,
Right.
that makes sense.
It's
Okay.
also drafting your element first lets you stay open to two classes.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're drafting lightning, you can flex later to either Lexi or Briar. If you're drafting earth, you can flex to either Oldhim or Lexi. I said ice, right? Or did I say earth? Either way, you're whatever element you're going towards early on, makes it easier for you to pivot to whichever class you're seeing people start to take.
Mm-hmm. And then the breakdowns by pack. That's it. So by pass 4, you're pretty exhausted. Actually, no. By pass, you have pass 3 maybe, but by pass 4, you're pretty much on to making a decision at that point, right?
You still have the elemental card, like the non-element elemental cards,
Mm-hmm.
cards like invigorate, like that. And then people are still picking up some of the class cards that are just real bombs, your Terra Sunders, that kind of stuff. So some of those will start getting taken. I feel like around pass 6 or 7, if you're still seeing element cards, usually it's ice, because ice is really the weakest element comparatively just on its own. A lot of the lightning and earth cards, just without the classes at all, are still good cards to have, but the ice ones are a lot more combo-y, a lot more reliant on other things, and they don't have the same super great ratios that lightning has, with it being cheap and low, or ice with it, or earth with it being expensive and high, if it's that weird middle ground. So ice can sometimes persist several runs through, but lightning and earth are gone by the first pass, typically.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. Okay, so were there any hot pulls you got in the first draft that you were like, this is my thing, or were you just all on the lightning?
So in the first pass, I wouldn't say so. Uh, what I did notice though is that the person next to me was definitely on Oldhim. So the second pack I opened, there's a foil Oaken Old in there, and I decided. And even though I'm committed to Briar at this point, I've already picked up some good Runeblade cards. I take that instead,
you
just to
hate
not let
drafted?
that go through. Just hate drafted that. Plus, I didn't actually own a foil Oaken Old, so uh, got to at least take that home.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably not passing the Corsham or whatever, right? So I think
Yeah.
everybody's feeling that, right? So
Someone actually did take the Corsham and then still made day two.
Oh wow.
Yeah, there was one pulled in the top 64 that I know of.
There is a rumor in a local draft pretty recently that someone pulled Corsham and passed it. I don't know if you were
Locally
at
here?
that draft. Yeah, at Lotus.
No.
Pretty sure.
I don't know that one.
That'd be what
This
kind of
was
prize pools are
actually
you guys running down there?
well,
Well,
recently did a
from what
whole
I
winning case.
recall, they mentioned that it was a newer player who didn't
Oh,
really understand what they had pulled and passed it. Um, anyways, that's aside.
Well, that's cool. Which need to figure out which shop that was.
I want to say it
But
was
yeah, this was.
Lotus, and I think they got
Oh
passed
yeah.
to David.
Oh, well,
But
good. Good
anyways,
for him. But yeah,
uh-huh.
actually, this was just like you. My first draft before this had actually just been the Vegas draft. I hadn't done a Tales of Aria draft before. Another Tales of Aria draft before this top 64 one. So it was a very nerve wracking in that respect. So after I win all three of my matches, which I actually would like to talk about the first one a bit, but after winning all three of the matches, we went back to someone's Airbnb and did an impromptu practice draft, just to have at least a third one under my belt before going into day two. Um, but my first match actually was against someone who I'd seen in Vegas, so it was really cool to see someone again, especially back up there at the top. So you're starting to see a lot of the same people show up to these events, and even though it's a limited environment, uh, I think it's a testament to how skill driven Fab is that the a lot of the same people are showing up at the top of the rolls, no matter even in a format like sealed or draft.
makes sense. So you went 3-0 in that, right? In that pod.
Yes.
Okay. What did you run up against?
I ran up against Briars,
Oh, really?
Briars and Alexi.
Okay, so then you were at least 4 Briars in the pod, right? So
Yeah, that's why I think that it was a 4-3-1. I think I went against the only Lexi, um, but the main thing about draft pods is you really don't want to get too weighted one way or the other. A lot of people saw that in the top eight, but this was also then the downfall for my particular pod in the top 32. So we do the practice draft. I draft Oldhim for the first time. I still haven't drafted Lexi, but I drafted Oldhim in our practice draft the night before just to kind of learn him. My first time doing Oldhim and Sealed was during a side event Friday too, just to have practice with it. I then proceeded to ignore all of that practice. We sit down for day two, and about 4 cards in, I'm still trying to do the same plan that got me there, right? Get Briar, just pick lightning cards, go with that. About 4 picks in, I realized, there's a lot of ice cards, there's a lot of guardian stuff being passed around, and the Briar stuff's going pretty fast. I should probably swap to Oldhim, and I didn't. I got the feeling that okay, there's pretty much all the people to my left are all on Briar. And there's either Alexi or Oldhim to my right. Turned out to be Alexi. Uh, and really all the lightning is going super fast. Briar cards are getting picked up pretty fast too, but the Guardian cards are really sticky. And then pack two comes around. About the second or third pass, there's an awakening, and I don't take it. I pass it. I really need to fill out this Briar deck that I'm very set on. It comes back around to me, and awakening makes it all the way back around to me. So at this point, I decide, well, I'm not going to let an Oldhim just have a free awakening. So I still took it, doing that old hate draft again, going off the experience from the top 64, taking that Oaken Old. And I just end up with a deck that was not very good. I feel like I lost really more at the draft stage than I did in the games. Like obviously there's a lot of skill in playing the game, but I just know that the power level of my deck was way down. Our pod ended up being 4 Briars, 3 Lexis, and 1 Oldhim, which
Oh, so there was a Wilden.
There was one, and I
Based off that
think
story, I was going to expect if no awakening was taken, could have been the only one.
Yeah, I wonder what else
there.
was he was going for there, but yeah.
Yeah, and I think the awakening going around was the signal that there was there weren't two, right? So that meant someone knew at that point they could run Oldhim with absolutely no interference. And obviously someone has to take those cards. There's just physically not enough cards to run um, all those heroes separately.
Mm-hmm.
You have a much smaller pool to pull from after a draft. You only have 45 cards. Um,
That's something
so
I'm curious about. Is kind of what signals like in that situation. You had an impression in the first pack that maybe Guardian is open.
mhm.
But what things are leading you to that decision? Because I'm still relatively inexperienced with drafts. So and they talk a lot about in the Fab videos or the pack one pick one about sending signals left and right, and if it's a good thing to send a signal or you don't want to send a signal, or and it's just kind of confusing to me. Like when you're in the middle of the draft, what are you wanting to know about the people on your left and right, and how does that influence your decisions?
You definitely want to figure out what elements aren't they passing you and what cards they're and any class cards they end up taking. Um, like a big thing for me is checking pitch values is a very good indicator actually. If you're noticing the cards that are still being passed over in the elemental side or of a particular biggie elemental or of a particular element over in Oldhim, earth or ice, if you're still seeing a lot of blues passed and you're still seeing the guardian cards, probably there's not an Oldhim right there. If you're seeing the really high power lightning cards go quick, there's probably either someone who's gone lightning to your left, and they're prioritizing probably Briar or Briar or Lexi. If the Earth cards start going too, um, but they're like you get a pass and it's okay. The lightning are gone, but there's still some Earth. And the next pack you get past some lightning, but the Earth is gone. Um, Probably that person, one or two people who are passing to you are on Briar.
Interesting.
Um, the arrows get passed until someone decides they're Lexi, and then the arrows start getting snatched up, especially if someone else starts taking arrows. One of those things about consistency and power I want to touch on is that in a draft, Lexi has access to just a larger quantity of arrows than she would in sealed. Because while you only get to keep 3 packs worth of cards, you have 24 packs, 4 times as many packs worth of cards being opened, and that's that many more Ranger slots that are being rolled on. So you have a better chance of getting those 4 and 5 power arrows that are so key. So you can actually build a deck with more arrows than possible in sealed from a draft. So running into what I faced up against in the top 32, it was 3 Lexis in a row. I hit all 3 of our Lexis.
Oh wow.
Um, and the first one who I went up against, Will Laystrom, he took our pod and he went on to the top 8. Um, but he had all of them had just really strong decks. So you can definitely get a very good Lexi deck out of draft, and I think it's key to leave yourself open to it. A lot of people will dismiss Lexi, but she is still a powerful character. That dominate on Shiver is just as good as arcane damage, frankly.
That's one thing that surprises me about Lexi. That's still hard for me to figure out sometimes. Is those on-hit triggers seem really darn good.
Yeah.
And to have access to dominate, it seems like Lexi is, at least in what I've seen from sealed, kind of the lowest on the totem pole, so to speak, as far as what people typically gravitate towards. But it seemed like that might be a mistake. And like you said, with draft, having more arrows uh, at your disposal that people often are going to be taking, they're leaning towards Briar. I think Lexi could be really good in draft.
Yeah, there's a reason that you saw people like Matt Rogers taking her on that day 2 draft. Um, every pod should really have 1 or 2 Lexis coming out of it because they can get that critical mass of arrows that's necessary to do a lot of damage. One of the other things I thought about swapping to is I also thought about swapping to Lexi because I opened up an Ice Storm as well in one of my packs, and I thought, well, maybe I should take this and swap to Lexi. I already have a bit of a lightning pool. It was my smallest lightning pool I was able to accrue over the 3 different limited pools. But at the time, I was thinking, oh well, I'm still building up my lightning pool. I can probably still run this mono lightning Briar, but Ice Storm is a very strong Lexi card, and it got used against me. Saw the card I passed coming at me across the combat chain.
Yeah, I mean, I think you were talking, Josh, why people. I mean, she doesn't have a weapon, right? And I mean that it matters in the end game, right? When everybody's running out of stuff, it does matter, right? But to your point, Matt, about the pitches, not the packs are pretty equally distributed on what they are, but not on pitches. So trying to gauge the pitches, that can be kind of a trap sometimes, right?
I find it more as to what pitch is being passed to you that you see, not trying to go, okay, well there aren't a lot of these pitches, but it's more.
Okay, I see.
Yeah,
I see.
if like I kept seeing blue
cards.
polar blast. Like, okay, there's if this is getting if there's several of these blue ice cards being passed on, there's probably not a lot of Oldhims upstream of you, since that's a pretty good pickup for him.
No, that makes more sense.
Yeah. If you don't see them, it doesn't mean that they got taken. It just means that either they weren't there, or even like Alexi need to fill out her pitch or something.
Yeah, so you're looking at it from a positive sense, a positive indicator, not a negative indicator. I gotcha.
Yeah. Whereas for something like a Briar Lexi upstream of you, if those lightning cards that are really good for Briars get taken from you, aren't reaching you, there's probably one upstream of you.
What were you going to ask, Josh?
I was going to ask, you mentioned you played the 3 Lexis. And I don't know the answer. So what was your actual record in the day 2?
Day 2, I lost all 3. I went from winning all 3 to losing all 3, which is how I got knocked out.
I still think it's pretty impressive to go from bubbling in at exactly 32 and you end up at 18th, I believe.
So I was 18th going into day 2. I was 26th coming out of day 2.
Oh, okay. So you still went from 32 to 18.
Yeah, for out of the top, out of the top 64, when we broke for day 2, I was 18th, just after getting those wins. And then after we finished that next draft pod, it was 26 on the way out. So my final rank at the calling was 26th, which I don't know if it was 550 or 650 people, but better than I expected.
Pretty darn good.
Yeah. And as a shout out to a lot of our Texas people, in the top 32 there were 5 of us from Texas. We had 2 guys from the local game store in Dallas. We had Brendan Patrick, obviously, and we had actually Bill himself from Reaper Games, one of the first fab stores in the U.S. He was actually playing right there, and made it all the way up there. And then myself, and we were the Texas crew trying to defend Dallas from everyone coming in.
That's something that was interesting to me. Is obviously I'm a little bit of a homer. I'm going to root for Houston first, Dallas last probably, but any Texan above anyone else. And still, out of 500 or 600 people, there's so many people traveling for this game. You would have expected that maybe there would have been a little bit more home team advantage, so to speak, just in sheer volume of people that showed up. But that's not necessarily the case. There's people traveling from people you saw in Vegas, If out of top 64, only 5 of them are from Texas, that indicates that people are traveling for this game, and it's got a diverse amount of people who are willing to travel and play for it, which I think is a good sign.
Yeah, I played people from all over. Nebraska, Iowa, California. You know, I should honestly start filling out a map of the U.S. with everyone I play against at a calling, because I'm pretty sure that by the end of it, could hit everywhere. We had someone who played against someone from Hawaii, someone who played against someone from Alaska. So a lot of those hard to get states, we're getting that bingo card.
Well, and I do want to give a shout out to I don't know if he watches Fab on this channel, but Eric Wainwright. He's from Tulsa. I saw him in the top as well. I think he's a team. I think he plays out of the Team Covenant shot. I mean, maybe not the only place he plays, but I think he's somehow involved with those guys. But yeah, I mean, he was a big Destiny player back in the day, well-known name at the top, and he topped as well. I don't remember his final record, but I remember seeing him on the top cut.
And actually, Steven from Team Covenant was 7-0.
Coming out of Swiss, yeah. And then we Drayden as well from the Tulsa group had a very good showing. So there was a lot of people in that group.
One thing I was curious about, because other than hearing about your unfortunate experience on day 2, the Houston group got really quiet in regards to the ProQuest. So I still don't really know what happened with our locals and what people saw and what happened. I was surprised about not seeing as many of the new heroes at the top 8, but you were there, and I'm assuming discussions were had. So do you know kind of what happened with the ProQuest and how things went for the locals and just in general?
Yeah, so first off, congratulations to McAfee for winning the ProQuest. He, Dallas local, so at least the ProQuest was defended locally with his Prism. But for a lot of us, were really tired going into day 2, so there were a lot of people who just ended up not doing the ProQuest. And those that did, unfortunately, didn't make it more than a couple rounds in before scrubbing out. But from what was seen and what was being reported, to me at least, while top 8, top 16, yeah, there weren't a lot of the new heroes. There was still a fair number of them overall as you expanded further out. And I think part of what it isn't that the new heroes aren't competitive. It's, I think, a comfort thing. People are just not as comfortable with them as they are the old heroes. And if they're about as balanced, then you can do just as well with the old heroes as the new heroes. They're not
That's
so
kind of what
overpowered.
I was kind of thinking that it might be like the meta isn't necessarily solved. There's been a lot of sealed, and I think people figured out how and what they want to accomplish in sealed, and I have ideas about what I would do in a draft. But carrying that over to Blitz or Classic Constructed for an actual, filled out deck, I still think it's still new. So, in a way, it's not really good. Surprising that people are going to their comfort blankets, still playing Bravo over Oldhim, playing decks that have been figured out. Like, this is the best way to play and build the deck for Bravo. If you're going to go aggressive or defensive, here's your 48 of your 60 cards already decided for you. Whereas I still think there's a lot of juggling with the new elements about how do you build the right ratios for your fuse. Do you have to stick to one to give yourself the best opportunity, or can you double dip? And then how does that work with your consistency?
Yeah, so on that note, there's definitely several decks for the new heroes that just have not been figured out. I don't think all of the old heroes have their, I would say, new meta deck completely figured out. But it is much easier to just use what already works and still do fine, especially if most people haven't adjusted either. Guardian, obviously, since they got new cards, they had a couple other things to consider. But like for Ninja, you're more adjusting for the fact that Chane's not as big in the meta anymore than you are the new heroes.
That's a very good point.
I know there's a lot of work being done with Dash right now, with Dash players, and Dash did a pretty good showing at the ProQuest as well. It only shows one in the top 8, but I believe there were 2 others in the top 16, if I remember right. So Dash is doing fine. Obviously, Lexi made it up to the top 8, but I think with Lexi, there's a lot of variety right now in builds. You know, ask any person their Lexi deck, they'll give you a different answer. Briar, you have the pure Earth deck that people believe is figured out, and since it just isn't super dominant over anything else, people are taking other decks. But the big question right now is how do you add that powerful lightning into Briar without the dilution making the deck not consistent anymore? I think that's still an open question, open thing to solve. Even just up to a comfort level. And then with Oldhim, from my understanding of talking to people, is it hasn't quite been figured out how to make an Oldhim that can end the game. They can drag a game on and not die, but they have trouble really finishing it off outside of just exhausting an aggro deck. So there's I think a lot of people who would normally attack that problem just went back to Bravo, rather than putting in as much to solve it, or just kind of declaring it done. So I think if my big fear is someone who's right now practicing Boltyn for nationals, is that someone is going to finally crack Oldhim. That's kind of my biggest fear right now.
Well, and then let's not forget, right? Nationals isn't that far away, so those people, those teams, whatever that are, they think they've got something spicy, they might not be wanting to bring it out, right? Because people already know who's qualified. They know if they're in or not. They're not fighting for anything in the pro, like they're not fighting for nationals in the ProQuest. So there could be some sleepers out there who, they may or may not have the spice, but I think we stand to get more spice at nationals than we will either last weekend or this next weekend. That's my theory, right?
The ProQuest isn't necessarily a statement of what to expect at nationals, because for that very reason, there's probably people who.
Yeah, no. If it was 4 months from now, it'd be a different story, right? But given how close they are, I think that you've probably got some people who are holding some stuff close to their chest. Just a theory, but.
Yeah, and on top of that, you also had 32 of us doing something else instead of the ProQuest. So that's
a really good point. Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah,
we finished them. Top 32. I was walking out around like round 4 or 5 of the ProQuest.
So, yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all those factors as to why. All 3 of those as to why we aren't seeing as much out of the new heroes. I think that they are all 3 very strong contenders. At the very least, tier 2. I don't think any of them is like a stinker. Like I hate to say it, there's no Levias in this set.
She'll have her day. It's coming.
Huh?
She'll have her day. I know it's coming. I'll figure it out.
She will. I'm working on something spicy for skirmish season. Don't worry. You already know what it is. You already know what it is. My Lannister Levia, no debt. I'm going back to it. It served me well at the end of the last skirmish season. I might do that again, or I'll just do Kano again. But yeah, the new heroes, I think, are all in a good place. It's just everyone's much more used to their standbys, and we only have so much time to practice.
Yeah, fair enough. So before we get out of here, are you headed up to Cincy?
I am not headed up to Cincy. I did just book my plane and hotel for Orlando, though.
Okay.
So I'll be doing that, but I'll be skipping Cincy.
And you are nationals qualified.
Yes.
So
yes.
He's like, please, bro, please, of course.
So I mean,
I just wanted to put some respect on it.
yeah. Thank you. Yeah. While I was unfortunately many times a top 8 but not top 4 at the RTNs, um, I qualified through XP. So I'll be making my appearance there.
Awesome. Well, fair enough. So, Josh, do you have any last questions for him? Or Matt, do you have any questions for us? All's fair.
Are either of you going to Orlando? Nope.
Nope. Not me.
Fortunately not.
Well, hopefully you guys will cheer us on from the sidelines. It'll be nice to go to somewhere else again to attack them. There was a little bit of expectations I felt for Texas defending itself at DFW, so now we get to be on the attack.
Yeah, that's one thing I'm really.
There's a strong Florida
Houston.
contingent, so
there is. That's saying is Florida,
where
California,
Kayo's from, right? Is Florida?
Rob is from Seigel, Tolarian Dropouts. He's from Florida, yes. There's I believe so at least, and there's Orlando is a very big fab community, from my understanding. Really, at least around Monarch release, the 3 big areas were California, Texas, and Orlando, and Florida in no particular order.
Yeah, I don't know that Rob is Florida, but I know he's East Coast.
Yeah.
But he may be Florida, but I don't know that for a fact. So
I don't know. But there's lots of fab players in Florida, so I'm sure they'll be just as big of, especially with nationals there, a lot of pressure on them to defend their turf as well.
Yeah, fair enough.
James White has said he wants us to really feel connection to our areas, and that's why we have things like nationals and worlds, why he wants that to be a big part of Fab's organized play pathway. And to me, that extends back down to the callings and all the store events where you want to defend your city, your store as well.
And that's one thing I've liked about, our Houston group is, a year ago, it was all about, winning the army events and when skirmish season is around, it was very competitive. But now that we've been traveling as a group and testing kind of together, I think we look at it more as a regional thing. We're like, Houston, we want Houston to be the best city in Texas for Fab. And then when we travel somewhere, we want Texas to be the best. Obviously, Houston would prioritize that. But it's very cool to see. It's been, for me, not a whole lot of experience in competitive games, to have a local group that actually becomes like a regional powerhouse, or home turf, and even store wars, and moving on to bigger groups that play test and work together. It's very cool to see and to be a part of that.
Well, awesome. Yeah. Well, Matt, thank you very much for joining us tonight and letting us kind of live vicarious through your experience. Do you have any shout outs or anything you want to give before we wrap this up?
Main one is everyone who out there trying to start Fab in your local community, keep at it. Houston, it's been crazy. We went from a Discord of 8 people to we have 150 people in that Discord now. Everything starts small, and just keep at it, keep building that community. It is worth it.
Yeah, and it can happen quick, because a little more than a year ago, it was mainly one store in Houston who did it consistently, and then we got a second store, and then now I can't even keep up. But you could basically play Fab any night of the week in the city, and that's amazing to me. And it happened, a big part of it, within just the last, say, 6 months, since just before Monarch, maybe. So if you build those communities and you're playing the game and you're getting your store to host it, do the army events, pay the $5, show up, let the store know that you want to play this game, and more stores will pick it up and your community will grow.
Sounds like solid advice. All right. Well, again, thank you both. It was good to see you on here again, Joshua. It's nice to see you again.
Happy to be back.
Yeah. So anyway, thank you both for joining. Good chats tonight. So if you're out there listening and you were at Dallas, let us know in the comments what your experience was, or if you're headed up to Cincy, maybe you can start talking a little trash. Not too much because you don't put a target on your back, but start getting the jabs in. You got to protect your hometown too, right? Go Bengals or whatever, right? So, all right. So with that said, I just wanted to remind everybody that my local Gungai, we have tournaments every Saturday. Come join us for our Armory events. We're actually doing a Tales of Aria draft because they were able to secure some first edition. So we're doing that this weekend. So come check us out and join us. And then, of course, if you are in the market for those singles to fill out your deck last minute before you fly up to Cincinnati or to Nationals, use the link below to go over to Fab Foundry. And I get a little kickback from that. So help support me, and it helps support a good local, to me, good guy who runs events as well, has a brick and mortar, and isn't just cracking stuff and selling them on eBay. So anyway, so with that said, I just wanted to, again, thank both of you guys for joining tonight. And say it with me now. Go Commando.
Go Commando.
Go Commando.